Yeah, what is the difference between disciple and devotee? Is the devotee is the primary stage for becoming disciple or what?
Devotee has more to do with a kind of relation with the Divine Mother. One has faith and one accordingly, the difference between devotee and disciple, right? So devotee has more to do with a kind of relation with the Divine Mother. One has faith, and according to the faith, one receives wherever one is her grace and protection. But disciple means to walk the path, which is a very different thing altogether. A devotee need not walk the path and still receives the grace and the protection depending upon how one relates with her. That's the difference. We should not look at them as stages. It's just different ways through which we connect with the divine. Though some would like to take it as a stage, that disciple means more serious business, so disciple is one step ahead. That's one way to look at it. Some people look at it like that. But need not look at it as two different stages. They are two different modes of being. That's it.
Somebody wants to become disciple, but not really, their aspiration is to become disciple, but not really. So, they future goals to become disciple.
See, whatever kind of relation you want to form with the divine, say of a disciple, for example, you will end up realizing it. That part is sure. All of us. If there is a strong urge for a certain kind of relation, it's perfectly fine, we end up realizing it. But one can equally remain a child of the Divine Mother, which is no less, no more, either ways. So, if there is a strong urge and a will and a faith, Shraddha, that one wants to connect with the Divine in a certain way, it will happen. When, how, time. One may already be a disciple without realizing it. There are so many instances. Dilip Kumar Roy is a classic example. He was already accepted by Sri Aurobindo as a disciple, and he didn't know about it because Sri Aurobindo told him that you are not yet ready or something like that. Mentally, you have an intellectual interest and, you are not yet ready. So he had the impression that I have not been accepted. So he went for initiation to a guru who called him and asked him to remain quiet. And he said, I can't quieten my mind. He said, don't worry, you sit here and, you will become quiet. So he went into kind of a meditation, and then suddenly he said, but you are already initiated. So he said, by whom? He said, your guru has come and told me. By Sri Aurobindo. Why have you come to me? So, in Sri Aurobindo's yoga, these traditional boundaries, like, how Amrita, he says, many of them just came and they grew into the household of the Lord. The typical discipleship which comes in traditional yoga through initiation, that's a different thing. And Sri Aurobindo has used the word disciples, but not in a very strict sense. He spoke about disciples in the ashram, disciples outside. But when we look at the mother, more often than not, she related with everybody as a child. And when somebody put her in the position of a guru, she was not very happy about it. She said, it's like lowering me to the level of a guru. So, the mother related with everybody as a child. So many letters of her, even within the ashram context. My child, Mapati. So that's how she constantly addressed. So,
devotee is one who has devotion. Disciple is one who follows a discipline.
Okay.
yeah.
Some time ago, a few years ago, I was in Germany and I met this gentleman and I knew he was from India and I went like this and I said, Namaste. He was the Archbishop of Agra. So I would like to know when and how did Christianity come to India? How did it sneak in? Nobody has an answer. Should we go back to him?
So what was his reaction, by the way?
He was was very friendly, and it's a long story. Then I got to know him later on, and we corresponded a little bit. But I never asked him, "How did you get to India? How did Christianity start?" And how are there many people who are Christians?
No, I feel I still feel it came with the Portuguese, as far as I know. But maybe Shradhalu may know it better. But I think it came with the Portuguese.
I think one time in the History Channel I saw that one of the direct disciples of Christ came near Pandit, near Madras area. And still there are some books and on the hill, his church is there, but came direct. Kerala or somewhere in South India.
Was it?
But it was direct disciple of Jesus Christ.
But that way, even there are stories about Christ coming to India, and there's a whole book on that which I've read.
The last years of Jesus Christ.
There's a book by Holger Kirsten called Jesus Lived in India. And he traces those missing years of his in India where he was trained and went back to preach and things like that. So you'll see very strong correspondences with some of his sayings as recorded in the Bible with some of the Buddhist teachings. But these are interesting things to observe.
I think in that book it's saying the last years of Jesus Christ was between the age of 13 and 21. And during that time he was in the Asian continent visiting.
Also, you should know when the Portuguese came, they were ruling the portion near Goa, and they had the Inquisition in India. And even after the Inquisition stopped in Europe, it continued in their administered region in India for almost 100 years, which included all the worst things which happened in Europe, but they continued there, and a lot of forcible conversions took place. But as such, institutionalized conversion came in when the British took over the whole of India. And then it was part of their state policy to start conversions and to shut down vernacular schools and promote English as a language and things like that. So all those things happened relatively later in the last 200 years.
Saint Francis came to Goa.
Yeah.
That's what I meant when the Portuguese time.
You did?
All the teachers were doing
Keep raising your hand.
Vasco da Gama and yeah, just speak up, yeah, please.
So, question, in the last 18 months, since you also left last year, around the world and even America, there are shootings in schools and just a lot of negative noise. Like today in Kuwait, somebody started shooting, France shooting. Is there something that you can help us to understand what's happening around the world with humanity and why people are doing all this? And what should be our role or what should we do to protect from these elements? Any thoughts? Just a very open general question of what's happening in today's world right now. And especially in South Carolina, just what happened last week also. In Charleston.
You hold the mic and start answering. No, that's
The one thing which is important for me to share here, I think it was Sri Aurobindo who made this comment that because of the pressure of the supramental force from above, it's like a pressure rippling down through the planes, and there's a pressure downward of especially the vital world towards the physical world. That beings of the vital world are trying to get access into the physical world and kind of extend their influence here much more intensely than before. Sri Aurobindo also in one of his evening talks, he makes a comment that one of the signs that the new age is beginning will be a sudden rise of people who will hold sway over large numbers of humanity. Charismatic figures and things like that. But this is all in discussion in the late 30s, early 40s. And you see those figures during that period, of course. But these are all signs that these beings of the vital world are trying to get a hook into the physical world. One of the things they do is build these large movements, which are intended, of course, to increase their control rather than do anything else. But especially beings of the lower vital world, they get into these kinds of things. They like to provoke people into chaos and confusion, conflict, and things like that. But what's happening on the other side is, on the human side, a lot of activities are helping people open to these beings. I don't know if you go to certain kinds of music concerts, there's a very dark energy, very low, coarse, crude, coarsening influence in which these people open to those kinds of influences, entities, and even they become vehicles, consciously or unconsciously, for them. There are also certain kinds of nightclubs which have similar atmospheres, where they do drugs and do all kinds of things which are typical of the things which attract those lower beings. But when you indulge in that long enough, those beings get a hook into you, and then they gradually extend their influence, and there comes a point where you may even be partially or fully possessed. And after that, well, you're no more under your own control. A lot of this chaos which you see with these kinds of freak incidents are because of these kinds of influences entering human beings.
Difference between avatar and vibhuti, like Sri Aurobindo was avatar, is. So the vibhuti and avatar, the difference between those two words. Is that similar or vibhuti?
I have a mic in front of me. I have to pick up. As a vocabulary, almost everybody likes to call their gurus avatars. So, avatar literally means incarnation. Each one of us technically is an avatar. You are an incarnation of the divine. Only you don't know it. You're not conscious of it. But generally, in the yogic sense, we use it with a very particular meaning. And that's when the distinction becomes important. Vibhuti is a partial incarnation or a partial emanation who may not be conscious of his divinity, and sometimes may not even be conscious that there's a divine power working or guiding him. But he has an extraordinary power which allows him to do something which is beyond the human range. And there is this action working through him. The avatar technically would be one who is a full incarnation of the divine, who is conscious of his divinity and conscious of his mission and conscious of his identity with the divine. That would be the technical distinction. Yes.
This is just piggybacking on it. Somebody just asked me casually, who was Sri Aurobindo's guru, and I said, I don't really have a guru, and exactly what I was trying to tell her, that he was an
There were influences that Sri Aurobindo himself refers to, who were like triggers or nudges to push him at certain points or help him at certain points, including Ramakrishna Paramahansa and Swami Vivekananda, who came not in physical form but in a subtle form. But he did not have a formal guru in that sense.
Yeah, I was trying to tell her that, and she said, oh, he didn't have a guru. I said, no, he did not have a guru.
Nor did Raman Maharshi, for that matter. And even Paramahansa Yogananda only accepted a guru for the purpose of respect for that whole system, otherwise he didn't need it really.
We went to see the movie actually, The Awake, and that's where it's all these conversations started.
Disciples of Sai Baba, I think he is avatar. There are so many other Babas.
You should respect everybody's love for and respect for their guru. And there's no question of commenting on somebody's faith or conviction of that kind. What I described was only a technical distinction. Otherwise, everyone is free to call their guru an avatar, or call yourself an avatar who is unconscious of his avatarhood. No problem.
Dr. Pandey, I think you've been very quiet, so I think I'll wake you up. You can try. In the psychology of the book that you wrote a chapter in the psychology of Sri Aurobindo, latest book, I think, is you are one of the authors.
Okay, that is not a latest book. Latest book is Veda of the Body, but that's entirely the book I wrote. But there is another, I think you are referring to Transformation of Consciousness, where there is a chapter
No, but in that particular chapter, you mentioned that Srinivasa mentioned that tuberculosis is not caused by bacteria or not a disease.
I don't recollect having written this. I would be happy to see. But there is a truth in what you are saying. There is a truth in what you are saying in the sense that the mother spoke of tuberculosis not being a disease but due to the depression of the vital system. And in general, one can say that, well, we can look at disease as being caused by agents from outside, or I mean now as a doctor, you know very well, or as the soil becoming favorable to the coming of the disease. Like what the Louis Pasteur's famous statement is, so much debated that at his deathbed, that it's not the seed but the soil. So bacteria and germs are everywhere, and why certain people succumb to it. And there are some instances of cases in the ashram. One I know directly. What was his name? Started with S. He worked in the marbling department. That's how I know. He was diagnosed as tuberculosis of the spine by two famous doctors, including one of them from abroad. And he asked the mother that, what should I do? So mother said, do as you like. So he took a second opinion, and again he was told that, it's already late and you better start the treatment right now. Otherwise there would be problems. You may not live long. Those are days in, way back, maybe late 40s or early 50s. So he again asked the mother, what should I do? This is what the doctors are saying. Mother said, do as you like. So he said, mother, I don't want to do as I like. I want to know what you like and what you want. She said, then. So she gave a very strong statement that it is only my grace that can cure you. Something like that, very powerful statement. And then he stopped he didn't take any medicines anyways. Then he just continued with that faith in grace, continued to work. And this happened when he was around 40. He continued to live till the age of 85. For some time he would have back pain and continue going. Similarly, when a couple of people who used to have been diagnosed as tuberculosis were sent to work with Rishabh Chandji's garden. This also I know as a direct instance where mother did not regard tuberculosis as a disease, but as something due to the depression of the vital energy, which allowed certain, germs may be externally caused. Mother also spoke of the germs simply as being carriers of vibrations of ill will. And she spoke about that. It's a whole thing in itself. Sri Aurobindo also spoke about the occult side of, what we call as germs. In a very famous letter to Nirodha, where he says, you are speaking as if things, you are speaking like the old traditional scientists who say things have to have either a material side or an occult side. But everything has a material side and an occult side. So in that sense, yes, tuberculosis is not a disease. But I don't remember whether I wrote in where I wrote. I mean, that part I don't remember. So.
I didn't want you to escape from answering questions.
Exactly.
Going back to yesterday's talk about the doctors, you go to a specialist, and the moment he tells you something, you really don't want to do it, just and after he's a specialist, then he has all the knowledge, and you are just a little person, asking help, and I'm saying, how should you react? I'm saying, should you just say, I'm not going to do it, walk out, because you can't do that. It would be hard to find another doctor, right? But we have done that, It was my husband, I told you, took him to the doctor. He said that he was going to get a very, some surgery, We came home, we set up the date. And it was 1 o'clock, we were supposed to go to the hospital. And 11 o'clock, my daughter and my son both on the phone, Mom, don't take Dad to the doctor. I said, we have already set up everything, we have paid, everything is done. And they said, no, Mom, you're not going to take him to the doctor. They just call him, tell him that you're not coming. And I said, that'll be hard, it's hard, difficult, at this time. But then I sat down with my husband, I said, you know what, Kip said, there's an alternate to it, and we don't have to go through this, and we can look into it. And we did. And, I called. I said, I think my husband is a little nervous about all this, and we are not coming today. And they understood. And then, we found out that we were going to go out of town to get all the other alternate done. Found out right in our town, we had a doctor who was from Harvard and was able to do very simple procedure, did not require anything. And that's like 5 years back. And at the last minute, we decided, and of course we had the mother's blessings, that's part of it. But I know it has happened many times that, I would go to the doctor, take the meds and bring it home, but I would not really want to care about this and then I'm cured, with something else or whatever.
Questions?
In ashram, people keep doing it and the doctors keep getting very irritated that they well, each case is different, but I feel that, if one goes to a doctor, then, one should be very simple in these things. It helps. If you've gone to a doctor, then fine, go through it. Otherwise, don't go and have a complete trust. In very practical, I'm not talking of a particular instance, each case. Otherwise, don't go, as you have a choice and option, because once you go into a medical groove, then it is very conflicting. And let me tell you from the doctor's point of view. I don't know whether Chuni Bhai will agree or not. If patients keep coming and then come back and tell you that, look, we don't have belief in your medicine or you. So I tell them, fine, I'm happy, but don't come back. It's a lot of time and everything. So it depends. Yes, individual instances are different, and sometimes major decisions, you take a second opinion and all that is obviously there are interventions and they take away. But each case is different. Each case. See, doctor has no choice but to go by what he has learned. And, he acts according to that. In his best interest, he believes that giving this medicine will cure or going through the test. Most doctors, as I said, are well-meaning people. They are not bad people. I can tell you that, But it is true that they have limitations of their paradigms in which they live. They have belief in their paradigm just as we have belief in our non-belief. So, it's a question of faith. So if we don't believe, we can choose an alternate paradigm and in which we have faith. But if we go into a medical group, generally it is good to go through that curve. And mother used to do that, She would send some people to doctors. Some people, she would say this. To many, she would say, there is a famous letter of Sri Aurobindo when somebody asked that, what should I do? Should I take the medicine or rely only on grace? And mother's reply came, take the medicines and rely on grace. So there is also things like that. So, each case is different. We can't generalize. Yeah, no, please, Chuni Bhai, I think.
We often meet this problem with mainly Indian patients. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I'm labeling as such, but I'm one of them.
No, I agree. I empathize with you.
When they come to see me, I don't interview two together. Husband and wife normally come, and if it's left out, the son will move in. See? So I have a whole family in the interview. The patient is totally left out. That's the first thing. So I tell them to go out. The true faces of the patient comes in. See? Secondly, I said, really you coming to get the medicine or you just get an advice? It's what to talk. Thirdly, I said, when you go out, the first prescription is that do not talk to any ladies. These These are my standard description. If you're going to do that, don't take my medicine.
Stop talking, yeah.
Thirdly, I said, really want to take a medicine or you not? Then he said, if it's expensive, I won't get it. Then I said, $4. In New Zealand, it's quite cheap actually. And then thirdly, I said, are you going to come and see me again or not? These are 4 or 5 items. I said, if you believe in it, then you come to me. If you don't, then go and get a second opinion.
Beautiful. They should teach it at school, right? Medical school.
No, I experienced it exactly. I mean, a very similar thing at the ashram setup. And come, doctor, I have not taken the medicine, and then no, don't come to me. I am not inviting you, I myself tell you, go to the ashram, sit at the samadhi, it's perfectly fine. But don't mix up two things.
Some people shut their business because they are just coming there just for shopping.
Yeah. We don't buy anything, we just.
You have a question.
Yeah. In Second World War, 1942, Mother acted, continue the Russian march.
Please sit, Malak.
And finally, the Germans were defeated by Russians because of Mother's action. If Mother is alive today, what action she would have taken on the Middle East?
Simple answer. Mother is still alive today. She is already taking action.
I'm a little confused. When I pray to Mother, I just talk to her. So I said, do you have prayers like they have in the Christian world or in other religions, or do you just talk to the Mother and ask for something or whatever?
You must start the prayer with the word O. Otherwise, it doesn't work, because O goes with Om as well as, then it works better. I have jokes about. Be spontaneous, that's what. So there is no such fixed prayer. But there, Mother has spoken about mantras which sprang up from the heart sometimes, and it's very good to, if you have one. Otherwise, prayer is, the beauty of prayer is that it should, as Sri Aurobindo says, rise on a crest of emotion. That's what is prayer. Otherwise, it's parroting. Prayer by its very nature is something that rises from the depths of the heart and reaches out to the divine.
There is a book, Prayer and Mantra.
Yeah, that's... Yeah.
There were a few cases where people asked Sri Aurobindo for a particular prayer, and he gave certain prayers. You might like to take a look at them, see if something resonates with you. The test will be, if you feel it resonates with you, it's good for you. Otherwise, you formulate something which comes spontaneously from you. But there's something else which is different from prayer. Prayer is always formulated, it's articulated. But there's a state of aspiration which is wordless, but which is the essence behind the prayer. But you can be in that state without any formulation or articulation, a state of relationship, a state of placing the problem before the divine, giving yourself, opening yourself. But it's a state and an experience in itself without needing words. And it comes straight from the inner, deepest part of your being. Mm-hmm. So this is the distinction Sri Aurobindo makes. The state of aspiration. The aspiration comes from your deepest soul. Whereas prayer is formulated by the mind and rises on the heart's emotion. So there are different sources, different formulations, but you see what's natural for you. That's good for you.
We have a lot of psychiatric problems. There's not a big society. I'm after you all the time, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Psychiatric problems in?
Psychiatric problems.
Where?
In India, in West, wherever you see.
Yeah.
And most commonly coming now is this dementia and Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
What should we do for them as a doctor we are? medicine, I don't believe in it because the number.
There is nothing much which helps. I think, basically what I have found and what I suggest, because in ashram we have an octogenarian population. The question is actually, it's a very highly professional and technical question about dementia. And it's rising world over because, partly because people are living a longer life. So it's coming more and more prominent, partly maybe because of certain dietary influences which we don't know yet. At one point of time, it was aluminum vessels and stuff like that. But one thing which helps is to keep the mind engaged in certain kind of exercises. One thing which helps in slowing down dementia is playing Sudoku. It's a known thing, very simple way, which does help. So in some way to keep the mind, yeah. The other thing is that in some instances, particularly where there is a very strong genetic loading and, invariably the mind gets more and more into a state of eventual confusion and, regressive state. So my approach is that, the person's outer consciousness is not active or accessible, but the inner being is still alive, and how we can nourish that inner being and be conscious that it's a soul which is not able to express its experiences or receive the world through the agency of the mind, but still active. So to touch that point, which is still alive like a flame inside, and it works very well. And that's another thing which I have used. Third is that, not only with dementia, with in general, when the mind is not very active, let's say people who are mentally subnormal, and to an extent it applies same with the dementia. Now, we are so used to mental and verbal communication that we forget that there is another form of communication which does exist, and that route and channel needs to be opened up. So that is through the senses, and particularly the sense of touch. It's the last to go. So there are people even in coma, they respond to touch. So I advise those who are near and dear to them that, look, do understand that though the patient may not receive verbal communication, at another level of consciousness, the person is in contact with you. So be sure that you are not being just casual and flippant, when you are around the person, or, you start not really bothering because the person is not aware, because the energy of love is still being received, and the channels, the senses are still active. So sometimes they just need a little caress, just a little clasping of the hands, maybe just putting your hands around the hairs, and all these things help a patient to feel the contact of consciousness and feel, strengthened inside. So these are things one can do. Acupressure works along different principles. It's more on the principles of, opening of marmas and nadis and pranic, imbalances. So it opens up the channels through which the prana can flow more smoothly, because just as there is a physical body and the physiognomy, there is a pranic body, and which has its own knots through which, the subtle nerves touch the gross nerves and enter into the pranic currents into the physical system. So when they get blocked, either because of overuse or underuse of the organs or other things, various kind of influences from the pranic worlds, so one needs to once again open them up, and they get knotted up. So by deep acupressure, you can release those energy knots and suddenly ease out the system. There are many ways of doing it. Acupressure is one of them. I prefer the way that Mother has said that, simply lay bare yourself and feel your body like a rug on the floor and open up everything and offer to the divine. That's a very simple way of opening all these knots. And these knots then become knots of pain. People suffer from chronic pains over a period of time, and here pain, there pain. But, one can just open it and offer it to the divine. And that's a very simple way to work it out. So that's a different principle.
To diagnose like in a pre-dementia stage, and family can tell the best, right? That the patients.
Yeah.
And the other thing, there are PET scan available right now that you can find out the hypoperfusion on one side and the other.
That's true.
So that's the early stage, like we do everything prevention. So this is like one of.
We use PET scan now, but again, because dementia itself becomes many types. Of course, Alzheimer's is there, and if one is alert, one picks up in the pre-dementia stages and starts these methods. But in any case, ultimately it is going to hurtle eventually towards, we can maybe slow the decline, or at one point it hurtles toward the decline. At that point of time, one should remember that there are other channels of communication which are open, and open them up. And even when these are blocked, there is another kind of communication which exists between human beings, and we should learn to, activate those channels.
Any medication right now in the US available, right, on research for the
I don't know.
dementia?
Behind the pipelines. Some medication.
No?
I don't know.
There are some
Coconut oil, 2 spoons daily is the latest I have heard. And honestly, it's going on in Mumbai very actively among top doctors. Coconut oil, 2 spoons daily.
For what?
Maybe I could talk about the brand and get some cut.
For Alzheimer's?
Yeah, drinking, not the head massage, drinking. Yeah, that head massage is Shirodhara. In Ayurveda, they use this. Mankind tries all kinds of things. It's okay. It's an elusive, I had long back written an article on the elusive magic potion. We are always looking for some ultimate medical remedy which will be the cure of all our ills. Fortunately, there is none. So that we can strive for other ways of conquering things.
I thought there's some medication on
Yeah, the
research
pipeline.
right now for the pre-dementia.
Plenty of. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. See, there are plenty of things which will come in the future. And at one point of time, I was involved with active research with Asia's topmost institution, NIMHANS, and that was piracetam. See, ultimately, if there is a magic pill which will really help us out, then it will be a sad day, because it will be like a declaration that ultimately man is just a bundle of chemicals. So fortunately, there are no such magic pills. They may slow down. Yes, they do slow down. But it's very important equally to research other areas and other dimensions. And unfortunately, that's an area which is very much neglected. But we are all the time focused on manipulating chemistry. And it's good, nothing wrong with it. But man is not just chemicals, and we are not just neurons. So I believe that there are other routes which are open, and a lot of talks I've given on this world over. One of them was on, recently we had this interesting case of Aruna Schonborg. I don't know whether you have followed or not. 45 years he was in coma, and So I think we have to take a real holistic look at human beings and to treat them holistically and not just manipulate medically.
How about the Reiki power? The Reiki?
So many ways, but as I said, there are no magic solutions. See, that's why I sincerely believe that there is no permanent solution except for a change of consciousness. So once I know that there is this remedy, I would rather put all my eggs in that basket and put all my energies in that direction. Because all other things are like temporary palliatives, and we have played with palliatives a lot, Whether allopathy, Ayurveda, homeopathy, this pathy, that pathy, they are palliatives eventually. And it's okay if, there is an exigency of time, there is attachment to the physical body and plenty of things, But the thrust should be on crossing over the critical border and a change of consciousness. Because truly speaking, if human beings remain, we as a species remain what we are, then I do not know how far our survival is a wonderful thing to happen. Honestly. I'm being very impersonal, maybe brutally honest, that if we remain what we are and who we are, in our interactions, in the way of life, in our greeds and all this, then honestly, if we survive, whether it's really a wonderful thing to happen or not. So I would rather go with fully with what Sri Aurobindo has said, that a change of consciousness and a crossover is the thing. And we should rather focus on that, particularly, coming to integral yoga. That's how I look at it. I personally would use medicine if necessary, but I don't much give weightage on, this pathy or that pathy. The only pathy is, divinopathy, and the only vitamin that helps is vitamin F and the unknown factor G. Vitamin F, I am sure you all know about it. This is the latest medicine, vitamin. Oh, that's vitamin F called faith. And G is grace. So take it and leave it at that.
I would also suggest another dimension which is which most people don't think of is preparing yourself for old age. Because as you age, many of these functions decline, but also there's a loss of flexibility, loss of control over thoughts, etc. So before you get into that point, how about training your mind to become quiet at will, being able to direct your thoughts, bring positive emotions, and things like that. Because if you've not done that early enough, then later on, that same habit has now got exaggerated and the covering of self-control is lost, and you have all those problems which come with Alzheimer's and dementia and all that. But the preventive would be start working on your basic mind and emotional control and purification. If you've done that soon enough, even if there's a decline of functions, your personality will still be a sweet and gentle personality and not a chaotic, confused, agitated person.
Yeah, please.
About 4 months back, I attended a lecture from a doctor and her team who did a work at the University of Irvine in California. So she studied 1,600 individuals and took the history of their lifestyle. They were all between 60 and 65. Then she waited 20 years and she looked for how many are still living who were 60, 65, and then she restudied and she found 200 out of those 1,600 individuals. So she collected the data and she interviewed all of them again, and this is basically regarding all the aging problems, So her whole focus was, what can she tell the audience about what has she learned? That these people who survived and who are between 80 and 90, what was the lifestyle they were living? So number one, she said that be connected with a group of people that you resonate. Like if you belong to a church, be in church. If you belong to a temple, so that was number one. Number two, she said, always feel very happy to enjoy the life. It's very much like what we follow with Mother and Sri Aurobindo philosophy, where you live the life but stay centered. So somewhat like that, she said. Then number three, she said, I didn't quite get that.
Answer from Siri. Serious. Okay.
Then number three, she said, have 2 glasses of coffee or tea every day. Then this is between age 60 and 90 age. So she went through several, even the nutrition, eating right, exercise every day, and then try to stay centered. She talked about yoga and meditation and all that. And she said these 200 people who are living, who are between 80 and 90, most of them are pretty healthy. They have certain physical issues, but they are pretty living happy and good life. And the ones who died with a lot of physical issue as well as mental issue, So that's sort of
Actually, it's many aspects are there to it, which including genetic. There are people who do all sorts of things and survive long. Maybe we can, I don't know, maybe we can close if there is some more questions, but I want to share a very interesting experience with Amal Kiran. This happened right in front of my eyes. Now we know that Amalda as a disciple did many excesses. And we all know, and everything under the sun he would have tried, including an overdose of drugs at times. Of course, that was by mistake, but he took 3-4 times, and all kinds of things he had tried in life, and still 106. So on his 104th birthday, I remember that there was a group which visited him, and they asked him, Amalda, what is the secret of your long, happy and healthy life? Even though he had dementia, obviously, but diabetes with insulin injections, but he remained a very, very jolly person. He could still joke at times, recite Savitri, and he would be like a child, would forget what he had and the names, but yet one could see that sense of the jolliness all around him. So when they asked him that, Amalda, what is the secret of your long and happy and healthy life? Suddenly he became very quiet. And we all were waiting, in that pregnant moment that what he is going to really say, because he has done everything. He can't say, I didn't smoke, I didn't drink, and I got up at 3 o'clock, I was extremely disciplined man. None of these things, because he was not any of these things. And then he comes out and says suddenly, love for the mother. And it hit us, at least it hit me so hard. I think one of the things which is the core in humanity and which is at least my criteria of making a quick judgment, assessment of whether people are sick or not and whether they are moving along healthy lines or not, whether they are inwardly alive or not, is a smile on the face and love in the heart. So if love is missing here, one may be very intelligent here, but there is lack of warmth here. Be very, very careful. Something is seriously amiss. This is my quick assessment. And the other quick assessment is smile on the face. So it costs you nothing and you don't have to, go through serious tests. But if you can smile naturally and spontaneously, then things are okay. By and large, you're okay. So I feel the energy of love is a very important thing which gives joy. And if you see the common factor in all these things, so moving with people and the congregation or, enjoying life, whatever you may say, it is this heart which comes to the forefront and nourishes us, because that's the center of flow vital currents into the body. So when this is missing, and so love is a very important factor. And when it is love for the divine, then it, of course, anything is possible. So that was his recipe. And recipe of somebody who was far from, but a wonderful recipe. I was very touched and moved when he said that. Love for the mother.
And he loves sweet.
Oh, everything. I mean, anything but, with Amalda, wonderful person, extremely, had a wonderful sense of humor, but there was no question of any kind of, control or anything. When somebody asked him, that, have you achieved a silent mind? He said, no, but I have made many persons experience silent mind. I have silenced many persons' minds. And somebody told him that, see, Sri Aurobindo is so great. He wrote 35 volumes. So he says, in that case, I am greater because I have 60 published and more in the pipeline. He had his way of making people, reveal great truths in very, with a touch of humor. That's not the criteria of somebody's greatness. Ramakrishna never wrote a book. Greatness is greatness. So, I think joy and love, that's very important. And an ice cream once in a while. I added joy and love, that third list. Yeah, please.
I'm 80. I was 80 last year in March. And I want to thank the Rama family for having this wonderful weekend every year.
That's a good.
This is my 6th year.
That's the best one.
Lots of knowledge. I go home with it. I think about it. My life has changed. And I was just 81 in March.
Sing a happy birthday for her.
Yes.